Fu drugged me and delivered me to the bed of the enemy prince, all just to make me take the place of his beloved in a political marriage. I endured endless humiliation in the enemy nation, yet Fu rose through the ranks, tearing up our betrothal contract to marry his true love. After the enemy country was destroyed, I returned home in glory for my meritorious service in defending the nation. Yet Fu publicly declared that I had willingly submitted to countless men to survive in the enemy country, tarnishing the nation's dignity. I went from being a celebrated princess who had won the people's support to a despised and degraded woman. In grief and indignation, I leaped from the city tower to prove my loyalty to the nation. When I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the day Fu drugged me. "Princess, have some tea to cleanse your palate." The voice of my personal maid, Rulin, reached my ears. My vision gradually focused, and the clamor around me slowly became audible. I raised my eyes to see the burly man sitting across from me. None other than the crown prince of the enemy nation. The fear etched deep into my heart made me tremble uncontrollably. "Are you feeling unwell?" A soft yet magnetic voice reached my ears. I turned to look and saw Fu sitting beside me, his deep, peach blossom eyes gazing at me with affection. It dawned on me that this was the banquet held in honor of the crown prince from the enemy state's visit. Had I been reborn? "Princess, this is your favorite Biluotune tea. Drink it quickly, as cold tea loses its flavor," Rulin urged me. I stared fixedly at the cup of tea before me. This very cup had destroyed everything in my past life. I had no idea that my personal maid had long been working under Fu's command. In my past life, Rulin, following Fu's orders, slipped an aphrodisiac into my tea. Once I lost consciousness, she delivered me to the crown prince of the enemy nation. By the time I woke up, I had already become the scandal of the imperial city. My father, the emperor, had no choice but to send me away in a political marriage. It wasn't until I came to my senses that I realized all of this was Fu's scheme, because the original princess meant for the political marriage was my illegitimate and unwelcomed sister, Zara Wei. Fu stared at me motionlessly, insisting that I finish the tea. I picked up the teacup and slowly drank from it. Only then did he seem satisfied and turned his head away, no longer looking at me. Casually, I took out a handkerchief from my sleeve, pretending to wipe my mouth, and slowly spat all the tea into it. "Rulin, I feel somewhat weary. Assist me back to my chambers to rest." I feigned discomfort. "Yes, princess." Rulin immediately helped me leave the banquet. Sure enough, the path she was taking me back on led toward the crown prince of the enemy nation's bedchamber. "Isn't this the wrong direction?" I spoke coldly. Rulin hurriedly pulled me forward by the arm, completely failing to notice my already sober expression. "Rest assured, Your Highness, you will sleep very comfortably tonight." Her words carried a sly undertone. "How dare you?" I flicked my sleeve, looking at her as if she were already dead. Rulin was startled and finally turned her gaze toward me properly. With just that one glance, she immediately fell to her knees with a thud, terrified. "Spare me, Your Highness. This servant was foolish and took the wrong path. I will take you back to your chambers at once." I let out a cold laugh, gripping her face with my fingers, forcing her to look up at me. "Rulin, oh Rulin, all these years I've treated you as my most trusted confidant, yet you colluded with others to set me up. Do you know the consequences of taking the wrong path?" Rulin's face turned deathly pale, filled with terror, and she immediately began kowtowing frantically on the ground. "Rulin knows her wrongs. It was General Fu who threatened me. Rulin never wanted to do this. Please spare me, Your Highness. Please spare me." She kowtowed until her forehead bled, not daring to stop. I leaned down close to her ear and whispered, "You know, the one thing I can't tolerate by my side is disloyalty." I slowly pulled out the hairpin from her head and handed it to her. Rulin widened her eyes in disbelief, tears mingling with blood as they continuously dripped down. "Will you do it yourself, or shall I have the Ministry of Justice do it for you?" I smiled as I looked at her. She shook her head in despair, then took the hairpin and without hesitation stabbed it into her own neck. Instantly, blood spurted out, a few drops staining the hem of my skirt. I frowned. How unlucky to be tainted by the blood of a lowly servant. Irritated, I raised my foot and kicked her in the chest. She collapsed to the ground, rolled a few times, and then breathed her last. Afterward, I went to Zara Wei's bedchamber. Seeing me, she seemed shocked. "Sister, why have you come here?" I didn't respond. Just raised my hand and slapped her hard across the face. "How dare you, a mere concubine born, have the audacity to address this princess directly as sister?" Zara Wei covered her reddened face, her eyes brimming with tears, paired with her delicate, cold beauty. She looked utterly pitiful, enough to stir any man's heart. Zara Wei bowed respectfully to me. "This humble sister pays respects to Her Highness Princess Changle. May your highness live 1,000 years." I raised my eyes to signal my attendant, who nodded and promptly placed the teapot he was holding on the table, pouring out a cup of tea. I took the cup of tea and examined it in my hand. "Zara Wei, today I'm in a good mood, so I'll grant you a sip of tea." I handed the tea to her, and her face turned pale as she tremblingly accepted it. "Thank you, Princess Changle, for the tea. Unfortunately, Zara is feeling unwell today." "Zara dares to, how dare you?" I immediately cut her off. "This is the finest Biluo-chun tea carefully selected by His Majesty for me. I specially came to invite my sister to savor it, yet you have the audacity to refuse me." Face. I pinched Zara Wei's face and forcefully poured the tea down her throat. Zara Wei choked violently, coughing while desperately trying to dig the tea out of her throat with her fingers. I kicked her to the ground, stepped on her face, and ground my foot a few times, leaving her completely immobilized. I laughed. "Isn't this just ordinary tea? Why are you so frightened that you had to spit it out?" Zara Wei averted her eyes, not daring to look at me. Is this a guilty conscience, Zara Wei? You always pretend to be aloof and innocent, but deep down, you're just as despicable as your ungrateful mother." Zara Wei is the daughter of the disgraced consort Mai, whose original name was Chunju. She was once my mother's personal maid, but in her ambition to rise from a branch to become a phoenix, she used her seductive charms to lure the emperor while my mother was gravely ill, successfully climbing the ranks and giving birth to Zara Wei and her brother Wei Anming. My mother never expected that Chunju, whom she regarded as a confidant, had been using her all along. Overwhelmed with fury, she coughed up blood and passed away. Later, it was by my hand that Chunju was consigned to the cold palace. As for Zara Wei and her brother, I spared them out of pity, believing them to be innocent. Little did I know that this single act of mercy would lead to my own downfall. She finally raised her head and glared at me, saying, "I won't allow you to speak of my mother like that." "Oh, did I say something wrong?" My mother regarded Chunju as a close friend, yet she climbed into the emperor's bed while my mother was gravely ill, causing her to vomit blood and die. Isn't that the height of ingratitude? I gripped her throat and stared straight into her eyes. "And you, not only did you seduce your own sister's husband, but you also conspired with Bo Fu to drug me with an aphrodisiac, trying to deliver me to the enemy prince's bed. Aren't you just despicable?" Her eyes widened in shock, as if she couldn't believe I knew everything. I patted her cheek and studied her face closely. With such a cold yet stunning beauty, wouldn't a touch of desire make you even more irresistible to that enemy prince? How dare you? If you do this, Bo Fu will never let you off." She glared at me with reddened eyes. "Now you're not even pretending anymore." Bo Fu achieved remarkable military feats at the age of 17 and was appointed as the Banner General by the age of 20. Because of his boundless future, my father, the emperor, betrothed me to him. At that time, we were just blossoming into love. I was the eldest princess, renowned as the most beautiful and talented in the capital, while Bo Fu was young and accomplished, handsome and dignified. Neither of us had any objections to this marriage. I thought we would smoothly get married and become the talk of the capital, but the moment Bo Fu laid eyes on Zara Wei, everything quietly changed. It was at my birthday banquet when Zara Wei, who had always disliked public appearances, suddenly announced she would perform a dance for me, wearing all white, no less. Though Zara Wei wasn't strikingly beautiful, her features resembled the goddess of mercy, with an ethereal and aloof aura. The white robes only accentuated her transcendent elegance. As she danced gracefully, I noticed Bofu's gaze, one he had never once directed at me. There was a barely perceptible glimmer in that gaze. Admiration, pleasant surprise, a flutter of emotion. At that moment, a wave of overwhelming loss washed over me. I knew Bofu had never truly been mine, nor would he ever be again. Little did I know this thought would soon be confirmed. Bofu began secretly meeting Zara Wei behind my back, and Zara Wei made no effort to hide it. Chatting and laughing with him freely, though they appeared restrained and proper, the air between them was undeniably ambiguous. Bofu told me he simply shared common interests with her, which was why they talked more, and urged me not to jump to conclusions. 3 months later, the crown prince of the enemy state arrived to propose a marriage alliance as a truce. Among the many princesses, only I and Zara Wei were of suitable age, as the legitimate eldest princess. I naturally wouldn't be the one sent for the alliance, especially since I was already betrothed to Bofu. Thus, the one destined for the marriage alliance was none other than Zara Wei. Bofu couldn't sit still any longer. Only when faced with the prospect of losing her did he realize his feelings for Zara Wei were already beyond retrieval. A man like him, forged in the fires of battle, would never hesitate, so between the two, he decisively chose to sacrifice me to save the one he loved. And Zara Wei, the beneficiary of this arrangement, how could she not know exactly how she had escaped her fate? I gazed at her coldly. Zara Wei thought she could remain safe and sound as long as Bofu was by her side, but unfortunately, she was too naive. I said icily, "You're quite confident, aren't you? Rest assured. I won't spare Bofu either. As for this joyful union powder, you can enjoy it all by yourself." Zara Wei struggled to get up, but the drug's effects had already taken hold. Gradually, her consciousness blurred, and she fainted. I stood up, clapped my hands, and commanded, "Carry her into the crown prince of the enemy nation's bedchamber. Remember, if any flaws are exposed, show no mercy. Kill on sight." Several servants behind me immediately knelt and responded, "As you command." The crown prince of the enemy nation, thoroughly drunk, was helped back to his room by a few attendants. Before long, indecent sounds began emanating from within, hidden in the shadows. I listened with relish, feeling utterly exhilarated. Suddenly, a familiar figure appeared before the palace hall. A silhouette I would recognize even in death. It was Bofu. He stood outside the hall with his hands clasped behind his back, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Myra Wei, I have wronged you in this matter. If you must resent anyone, resent me. Zara is not like you. She has suffered too much since childhood, and I cannot let her endure hardship in the enemy's land. But you are the most beloved princess of Wei. I believe that even if you marry into their kingdom, they would not dare mistreat you." There was not a trace of remorse in Bofu's words, only an air of utter self-assurance. Zara Wei's suffering was the consequence of her own mother's misdeeds. What did that have to do with me? Just because my life had been more privileged, was I supposed to suffer in her stead in the enemy's land? Bofu arrogantly assumed that my noble status would ensure my safety and comfort in the enemy's kingdom, but he was wrong. There, I lived a life worse than that of an animal. The more noble the princess, the more they sought to trample her underfoot. In my past life, after being sent to the enemy country as a peace bride, I was reduced to a lowly servant, bullied by all. Even a mere guard could humiliate me. The more I resisted, the more they devised cruel ways to torment me. They subjected me to endless humiliation, throwing me into pigsties to fight with animals for scraps of food. My dignity was shattered and ground into the dirt. Yet from beginning to end, I never shed a single tear. Eventually, I endured until the enemy country fell. Remembering my contributions to defending our nation, the kingdom of Wei welcomed me back with honor and glory. On the way back to the capital, the common people lining the roads welcomed me with flowers, shouting, "Princess Changle has suffered for the nation." I finally shed tears. The first drop in 3 years. I had thought all hardships were over, that I could strive to let go of the past and start anew, but Bofu shattered my hopes once more. It happened during a state banquet when Zara Wei deliberately came to provoke me. By then, she was already Bofu's lawful wife. offering me tea with her 8-month pregnant belly on display. "I've always owed you a word of thanks, sister. Back then, it was thanks to your generosity that Bo and I could be together. Now, I'm living in bliss. I wonder how you've been faring in the enemy's land." Her radiant smile made me sick to my stomach. Without a word, I flung the scalding tea in her face, causing her to scream and immediately collapse to the ground. Bo Fu rushed over to help her up and, in front of everyone, sternly declared, "Rumors say that Princess Changle, in order to survive in the enemy country, willingly submitted to countless men, long ago casting aside propriety and dignity, developing a rude and unreasonable temper. Now it seems these rumors are not unfounded." As soon as he finished speaking, I felt as if a bucket of ice water had been slowly poured over me from head to toe. I stood frozen in place for a long time, unable to move, while the murmurs of gossip gradually reached my ears. And countless scrutinizing eyes fell upon me. At that time, I was helpless and at a loss, finally covering my face and fleeing in disgrace. Not long after, rumors began to spread among the people about my scandal in the enemy country, such as how I pleased the men of the enemy nation, how I degraded myself willingly as a slave. I went from being the celebrated and beloved meritorious princess to a despised and reviled woman scorned by all. Recalling this, my nails dug deeply into my palms. Blood spilling onto the ground, I watched Bo Fu standing ahead with his hands behind his back, and waves of hatred surge within me. I wish I could tear him to pieces, but that would be too easy for him. I want him to watch as he destroys everything he loves most with his own hands. The sounds in the room rise and fall incessantly. What would Bo Fu feel if he knew the person inside was none other than Zara Wei, the one he had so carefully protected and cherished? I left without a word. And that night, I slept exceptionally soundly. Early the next morning, the maid Kuya woke me up. "Princess, something terrible has happened." I rose unhurriedly and asked, "What is it?" "General Fu has brought a large group of clan members, saying they're going to catch the enemy prince in the act. They claim that the princess has been secretly having an affair with the enemy prince." I burst into laughter. "Come, help me with my makeup. Today is a good day. I shall wear bright red." Kuya asked in confusion, "Princess, why aren't you panicking at all? Shouldn't you immediately go and clear up the rumors?" "No, the show is about to begin. When it does, the rumors will collapse on their own." By the time I arrived, Bo Fu was leading a large group of clan members outside the crown prince's palace of the enemy country. He cupped his hands in salute and called out loudly, "Bo has invited you all here to seek justice for me. The Princess of Changle has broken off her engagement with me, disregarding the dignity of the royal family, and is secretly involved with the crown prince of an enemy state. I implore you all to uphold justice for me. General Fu, slandering the royal family is a grave crime," the leader shouted sternly. Bo Fu, however, looked utterly confident. "You may all follow me inside to see the truth for yourselves." With that, he raised his hand to open the door. I cleared my throat and said, "I heard someone is spreading rumors about me." The crowd turned their heads upon hearing this, watching as I approached slowly in my deep red gown. "Greetings to Princess Changle," the crowd chorused in unison, bowing with folded hands. When Bo Fu saw me, his eyes widened in shock for a moment, freezing in place. "Preposterous, Princess Changle is right here. Bo Fu, what do you have to say for yourself? You dare slander and spread rumors about Princess Changle, Bo Fu. Your heart deserves death. Bo Fu, have you lost your mind?" Amid the continuous accusations from the crowd, I slightly raised my hand and said, "It's all right. I believe General Fu must have misunderstood. Last night, as I passed by, I did hear some peculiar noises. Why don't we go in and see for ourselves who the adulterers really are?" Yet, Bo Fu's hand resting on the door remained motionless, his eyes dark and unreadable. I pushed him aside without hesitation, raised my foot, and with a boom, the door was kicked open by me, a strong scent of decadence wafting out. On the bed, two people were nestled together, the crown prince of the enemy country raising his head with drunken, bleary eyes to look. "Ah!" I screamed, covering my eyes. "Zara Wei, how could you engage in such disgraceful acts in the palace?" Hearing the name Zara Wei, Bo Fu rushed in like an arrow. Upon seeing the flawless face on the bed, his face turned deathly pale. His body stiff as a lightning-struck dead tree, rooted motionless to the spot. The room was deathly silent, with the various clan members wearing different expressions, exchanging glances. Zara Wei finally came to her senses and, upon seeing the room full of people, let out a piercing scream, pulling the blanket over herself to cover up. Outrageous, outrageous. Princess Zara, how could you demean yourself like this? What face does this leave for our Wei kingdom? Disgrace to our nation's dignity, a disgrace to our nation's dignity. The cries of the royal relatives filled the air. The enemy crown prince rose leisurely, his eyes brimming with arrogance. So this beauty turns out to be a princess of Wei kingdom. Your Wei hospitality towards outsiders is truly generous and thorough, he said, then wore an expression of lingering relish, utterly repulsive. I glared at him and snapped, Crown Prince of the enemy state, I advise you to watch your tongue. This is Wei kingdom, not some backwater corner of your domain. My sister, Zara Wei, has always been pure as ice and jade. For things to come to this, she must have been drugged by someone with ill intentions. I approached Zara Wei and spoke softly. Zara, tell me, who was the one who drugged you? Harming the royal family and tarnishing a princess's virtue is a crime punishable by the extermination of 9 generations. Zara Wei looked at me with tear-filled eyes, too afraid to speak. The one who had drugged her was Bo Fu. I had merely taken advantage of the situation. If Zara Wei dared to accuse me, the investigation would ultimately lead back to Bo Fu. Zara Wei glanced up at Bo Fu behind her, and he cowardly lowered his head. In the end, she shook her head and whispered weakly, No one drugged me, I just drank too much and entered the wrong room. Ah, what a perfect match, what deep affection and profound loyalty. I smiled at her, my eyes filled with endless mockery. How foolish you are, sister. She glared at me fiercely, as if she wanted to skin me alive. With my maneuvering, such a scandal spread throughout the imperial city, and Zara Wei was undoubtedly destined to be the princess sent for political marriage. However, I still underestimated Bo Fu's capabilities. On the very day of the marriage alliance, Bo Fu blocked Zara Wei's carriage. The emperor frowned and rebuked, Bo Fu, do you realize what you're doing? Bo Fu knelt before him, holding the tiger tally recently bestowed by the emperor, and declared loudly, This general is willing to exchange the position of Biaoqi Grand General to spare Princess Zara the humiliation of a political marriage. Silence suddenly fell all around. With only the sound of fluttering banners breaking the stillness, the border situation is currently tense. Yet Bo Fu declares he won't serve as the banner general anymore. This is clearly a threat to the emperor. Your reason? The emperor's displeasure was evident on his face. Trading a woman's lifelong happiness for border security is the shame of all military officers. Suddenly, he drew his sword and slashed his palm, letting blood flow down and drip onto the ground. If your majesty grants me 3 months, I swear to crush the enemy territory and wash away this disgrace with blood. The emperor gazed at the blood slowly spreading on the ground, then suddenly clapped his hands and laughed heartily. Good, this is the true valor of our Wei warriors. He turned and barked at the protocol officer, issue the decree. The marriage alliance is postponed for now. I want to see how General Fu will conquer these enemy lands for me. I watched everything coldly. His act of retreating to advance was truly masterful. It both protected Zara Wei and earned him a reputation for loyalty and bravery. Though such grand claims about conquering enemy territory, only Bo Fu would dare say such things. Pity he lacks the capability to back it up. In my previous life, the one who destroyed the enemy nation and rescued me from dire straits was not Bo Fu, but my younger brother, Wei Yochi, from the moment I was sent away for a political marriage. Even as the crown prince who could die on the battlefield at any time, he fearlessly requested to lead the troops into war. It took him 3 long years to annihilate the enemy and bring me back to the Wei kingdom. Yet, less than a year later, Wei Yochi was accused of plotting rebellion. Stripped of his title as crown prince, and executed immediately, Bo Fu seized the opportunity to support Zara Wei's younger brother, Wei Anming, in ascending the throne. Only then did I realize this was yet another scheme by Bofu, but it was already far too late. I was left utterly without support in the Wei kingdom, drowning in endless despair, with no choice but to end my life to prove my loyalty. That day I stood by the city wall, the cold wind like a knife, cutting my cheeks with pain. My plain white mourning clothes flapped loudly in the wind as I clutched tightly to Yochi's urn in my arms. Wei Yochi lived a life of integrity and served the country loyally. He did not deserve to bear such accusations. Below the city wall, a dark mass of people pointed and whispered, their gazes at me dripping with venom. Look, that's the Princess Changle who was defiled in the enemy country. The crown prince rebelled. How innocent could his sister be? She's tainting the land of Wei. As I listened, I suddenly laughed, laughing until tears streamed down my face. How ridiculous. I once married for the sake of my country, enduring endless humiliation, only to have Bofu publicly expose those shameful past events after my return. I had thought that as long as I endured, at least I would still have my younger brother by my side. But now, even Yochi has been killed by them. I lowered my head to look at the urn in my arms, my fingertips trembling as they traced the patterns on its surface. Yochi, it's your sister's fault for being useless and dragging you into this. Bofu stood beneath the city tower, holding Zara Wei in his arms at the forefront of the crowd, looking up at me with cold eyes. The hatred burned like raging fire, my eyes fixed on him, my voice hoarse as a vengeful ghost. Bofu, you schemed to have me defiled by the enemy, humiliated in a forced marriage. You slandered my name, destroyed my dignity, and now you won't even spare my brother. You preach loyalty to king and country, yet for personal gain you butcher the loyal and virtuous. How dare someone like you continue to live? Bofu's expression darkened slightly, but soon he regained his haughty demeanor and said coldly, Myra Wei, have you lost your mind? The crown prince's rebellion is irrefutably proven. What does it have to do with me? As for you, a lowly woman trampled upon by thousands in an enemy country, how dare you stand here and question this general? His words were like knives, mercilessly stabbing into my heart. I laughed like a madman. Solid evidence. Bofu, do you really think there's no retribution in this world? Even if I become a ghost, I won't let you off. I'll have you torn apart by 5 horses. I'll make sure you die without a burial place. They all thought I was insane, watching me with laughter one by one, their eyes filled with endless mockery. I suddenly spread my arms wide, the morning robe fluttering in the wind. If the heavens have eyes, grant Myra Wei the justice she deserves. I want Bofu to pay with his blood. May he die a wretched death. As the words fell, I leaped forward. The wind howled in my ears, the screams of the crowd fading into the distance. I closed my eyes. Boom! I collapsed in a pool of blood. The urn I was holding shattered, its ashes scattering and mixing with my blood as it flowed to Bofu's feet. The sky suddenly changed, and in the midst of June, snow began to fall in flurries. As I gazed at the vast whiteness, I finally drew my last breath. On my way back to the palace, someone blocked my path. Wei Anming, that younger brother of Zara Wei, was it you who forced my sister to drink that poison? He glared at me, his eyes filled with malice. She brought it upon herself, she deserved it, I replied with a smile. His gaze turned icy. Carrying a faint but unmistakable intent to kill, I was instantly on guard. Wei Anming had always been an enigma, impossible to read, before I could react. He raised his sword and pointed it straight at me. The cold glint of the blade flashed as it aimed directly for my throat. I instinctively took half a step back, but at that moment, a fierce gust of palm wind suddenly slashed toward Wei Anming's wrist. Clang! The long sword clattered to the ground as Wei Anming let out a muffled groan. Staggering backward, I turned my head and saw Wei Yochi standing beside me, his face as dark as frost, a murderous intent churning in his eyes. Wei Anming. He uttered each word with bone-chilling coldness. Are you seeking death? Clutching his numb wrist, Wei Anming's gaze flickered between me and Yochi before he suddenly forced a sinister smile. His Highness the Crown Prince is quite imposing. Don't misunderstand, I was merely joking with Princess Changle. Who knew she'd be so easily frightened? Wei Yochi angrily shouted. Get out. Wei Yanming narrowed his eyes, eventually bent down to pick up the sword, and before leaving, gave me a meaningful look. Princess Chang'e, we have plenty of time ahead. Only after his figure had completely disappeared did I slowly let out a sigh of relief, turning to look at Wei Yoqi. Why are you here? Wei Yoqi didn't answer, just stared in the direction Wei Yanming had left, his gaze dark and terrifying. Since my rebirth, Wei Yoqi was still in Jiangnan dealing with the drought among the people, so this was my first time seeing him. Recalling the scene from my past life where he was executed immediately, I suddenly felt a pang in my nose. He abruptly withdrew his gaze and looked at me, his expression extremely complicated. Elder sister. This address of elder sister made my heart skip a beat. His tone was off, my voice trembled slightly. Did you already know Wei Yanming would come to block me? Wei Yoqi fell silent for a moment, then suddenly raised his hand, his fingertips gently brushing past a stray lock of hair by my ear, and whispered, because in the previous life, he stopped you here too. My entire body stiffened, as if my blood had instantly frozen. How could he know about the previous life? Wei Yoqi looked at my shocked expression and suddenly let out a bitter laugh. Sister, you've also come back, haven't you? I stared intently into his eyes and finally saw the familiar pain deep within them. Yoqi, my voice trembled, you, also reincarnated. He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, his gaze was filled with resolve. Yes, in this life, I won't let anyone hurt you again. It turns out Wei Yoqi had returned at the same time as me. When he hurried back from Jiangnan and found that I had already seen through Bo Fu's scheme and successfully made Zara Wei suffer the consequences of her own actions, he realized I had also been reborn like him. He unfolded a list on the desk. Since coming back, I've been gathering evidence of Bo Fu's factionalism and self-serving alliances, he said calmly. My fingers lightly traced over the list. Vice Minister of War Zhu Mian, Shuozhou Deputy General Zhao Rui. Are these all the confidants he's gathered for Wei Yanming? Bo Fu certainly knows how to pick, all inconspicuous yet crucial positions. Sister, you missed this one. A slender hand suddenly reached from behind, pointing to the end of the list. His fingertip, stained with cinnabar, drew a blood-red circle around. Zheng Luan, Assistant Minister of the Imperial Stud, the one in charge of the imperial horses. During ancestral ceremonies, he can get close to the emperor's carriage. I looked up sharply, meeting Wei Yoqi's deep, shadowed eyes, dark circles faintly marked beneath them, a clear sign he hadn't slept for days either. In my previous life, it was because a guard from the imperial escort suddenly attempted to assassinate the emperor during the ancestral worship ceremony. Later, that person claimed to be under Wei Yoqi's command, so the Shuozhou army is the decoy, and the real killing move lies with the imperial horses. I slowly clenched the list in my hand. Wei Yoqi suddenly let out a cold laugh, taking out a black iron token from his robe and throwing it onto the table. The characters Shuozhou on the token had been forcibly scratched off, revealing the hidden mark of Yulin beneath. Bo Fu had the Shuozhou army impersonate the imperial guards in their operations. Since the imperial guards were the emperor's personal protectors, they were authorized to carry weapons in close proximity during ceremonial events. However, only the emperor and the crown prince could truly mobilize the imperial guards. Thus, in the previous life, when those fake imperial guards rebelled during the sacrificial ceremony, it was naturally assumed to have been ordered by the crown prince. He even dared to forge the command token. I laughed in anger, my nails scraping an ear-piercing sound across the table. Is he really in such a hurry to take your life? Unlike the previous life, the two of us have become harder to deal with. So naturally, he couldn't resist acting sooner. 3 days ago, when I infiltrated the Shuozhou military camp at night, I also discovered they were secretly altering their armor, he said in a low voice. The inner lining was embroidered with dragon patterns. I gasped. This was meant to solidify the crown prince's charge of treason. A thunderclap exploded outside the window, illuminating half of Yoqi's face. His eyes churned with the same ruthless determination I remembered, the very look he had when he was dragged to the execution platform in our past life. Elder sister, it's time to close the net. he said, picking up a vermilion brush and drawing a glaring red line across the list, like a streak of blood. I removed the coiled dragon jade pendant from Wei Yochi's waist and examined it carefully in the candlelight. The white jade was smooth and warm. The dragon motif lifelike. This was the symbol of the crown prince's status. What does this mean? Wei Yochi looked at me in confusion, his brow slightly furrowed, a cold smile curled at the corner of my lips. This is bait. Wei Yochi's eyes flashed with sudden understanding. You're trying to lure Bo Fu into taking the bait. I tucked the jade pendant into my sleeve. Since he dared to forge your token, he would naturally be interested in this jade pendant as well. With the ancestral ceremony approaching, if the crown prince's jade pendant were to accidentally fall into his hands, he would surely make use of it. But what if, during the confrontation, his pendant turns out to be a fake? Sister, this plan of yours is brilliant. Outside the window, the night grew deeper. I gazed at the brightly lit general's mansion in the distance, where lived the person I hated most in both this life and the last. This time, I will make sure he pays in blood. At dusk the next day, I deliberately changed into a plain white gauze dress and fastened the imitation coiled dragon jade pendant prominently at my waist. The Jade Fragrance Pavilion was on Bo Fu's daily patrol route through the palace grounds. I had ordered a pot of strong wine to be prepared and sat alone in the pavilion, pouring myself drink after drink, when the familiar sound of footsteps approached. I immediately feigned a drunken stupor and slammed the wine pot heavily onto the stone table. With a choked voice, I murmured to myself, "Why must you treat me this way? What is the princess doing here?" Came Bo Fu's voice. I slowly turned sideways, letting the jade pendant at my waist glow softly in the setting sun. Sure enough, his gaze was immediately drawn to it, his pupils slightly contracting. Staggering to my feet, my eyes reddened. "I gave you my whole heart. Why did you betray me? Did you think I knew nothing at all?" "The princess is drunk," he interrupted coldly. I grabbed his sleeve abruptly. "That cup of tea, you know perfectly well what was in it." Bo Fu's expression changed slightly, and he instinctively glanced around. After confirming no one was nearby, he lowered his voice and said, "Your Highness, be careful with your words. I have no idea what you're talking about." I slumped onto the stone bench, pressing my forehead against the cold stone table. "I wish I had never met you." As I spoke, my voice gradually weakened, and finally, I pretended to succumb to the effects of alcohol, collapsing onto the table in a feigned slumber. The pavilion was enveloped in silence, and after a long while, the sound of footsteps faded away. I opened my eyes, and the jade pendant at my waist was already gone. The fish has taken the bait. 7 days later, the ancestral worship ceremony. I was dressed in formal crimson palace attire, standing with a group of concubines on the outer perimeter of the ancestral temple. Zara Wei claimed illness and did not attend. Needless to say, I guessed that Bo Fu, fearing she might be accidentally harmed in the impending chaos, simply kept her away. Just as well, it saved me the trouble of dealing with her. Before the ancestral temple, incense smoke curled upward as Wei Yochi, clad in the bright yellow court robes of the crown prince, performed the grand ritual of 3 kneelings and 9 prostrations. Just as the emperor raised the ceremonial wine, a guard beside the imperial carriage suddenly lunged forward, a cold glint flashing from his sleeve. My pupils contracted sharply. The dagger was merely 3 inches from the emperor's throat. "Protect his majesty." Bo Fu's roar echoed as blades were drawn in unison. He leaped in front of the emperor, his long sword deftly deflecting the assassin's dagger. At that moment, over 20 imperial guards unsheathed their swords, their cold steel all aimed at the emperor. Bo Fu led the soldiers to form a human wall, shielding the emperor at the center. In the chaos, Wei Yochi slayed 3 rebels in a row, their blood splattering across his pale face. Yet, when the crown prince approached, the rebels did not harm him in the slightest. To outsiders, it appeared as though they were allies. And the act was flawlessly executed. Hiding in the shadows, I observed the prolonged skirmish. The last rebel was subdued by Bo Fu, and over a dozen corpses lay scattered in front of the ancestral temple. The emperor, in a towering rage, pointed at the kneeling rebels and roared, "Speak, who dares to command you to assassinate me?" The rebels remained silent as iron. Bo-fu suddenly swung his blade, and a head rolled to the ground. "Refuse to confess, and this will be your fate." His sword dripped with blood, his gaze icy. I watched his performance with cold eyes when suddenly a guard stumbled over and reported, "Your Majesty. We found this on the rebel leader." The object he held high was none other than the coiling dragon jade pendant. The coiling dragon jade pendant. The emperor snatched it, his face darkening. He turned sharply to Wei Yochi. "You traitor, what is this?" The entire hall erupted in uproar. Before Wei Yochi could speak, the restrained assassin suddenly raised his head and gave the crown prince a bitter smile. "Your Highness, this humble servant has failed the mission. I shall atone with my death. I beg you to spare my family." With that, he bit off his own tongue, blood gushing as he collapsed dead on the spot. The emperor, enraged, hurled the jade pendant at Wei Yochi. "You unfilial wretch, what more do you have to say for yourself?" Wei Yochi stood straight-backed, his gaze steady, showing not a trace of panic. I immediately knelt and pleaded urgently, "Father, Yochi grew up under your watch. No one knows his character better than you. He would never commit such a treasonous act. Someone must be framing him. I beg you to investigate thoroughly." In the crowd, Wei Anming sneered and said, "Princess Changle, by shielding the crown prince like this, are you perhaps also involved in this rebellion?" I glanced at him indifferently. "Wei Anming, wouldn't you be the one who benefits the most if the crown prince were to step down?" Suddenly, his face twisted in rage as he roared at me, "Myra Wei, don't you dare slander me." "Oh. It seems I hit a nerve. How defensive. You." I suddenly stood up and walked toward the emperor under the astonished gazes of the crowd. "Father, may your daughter take a closer look at that jade pendant." I picked up the jade pendant from the ground, pretending to examine it carefully, then suddenly laughed. "The craftsmanship of this imitation is quite exquisite." Bo-fu's face darkened, his eyes unfathomable. Wei Anming burst into laughter. "Myra Wei, stop your futile struggles. Confess now, and I may beg Father for leniency, granting you and your brother a proper burial." The emperor's eyes flickered slightly. "Changle, what do you mean by this?" I retrieved another jade pendant from my sleeve and raised it high. "This is the true crown prince's coiled dragon jade pendant." Instantly, everyone present froze in shock, Bo-fu's face turning deathly pale. With both hands, I presented it to the emperor. "I beg your majesty to discern the truth." The two jade pendants shimmered with a warm luster under the sunlight, their patterns nearly identical at first glance. However, upon closer inspection, the one presented by Bo-fu had slightly duller dragon eyes, whereas the one in my hand boasted exquisitely detailed and fluid dragon scales. Its jade texture as smooth and radiant as fine cream, the naturally formed fibrous patterns in the dragon's eyes were clearly visible. This was the true imperial gift bestowed by the royal family. The emperor took both pendants and carefully compared them, his expression gradually shifting. Bo-fu's pupils constricted abruptly as he stared at me in disbelief, a flicker of panic flashing in his eyes. I let out a cold laugh, my voice crisp and clear. "I wonder what punishment General Fu deserves for forging the crown prince's jade pendant, framing an innocent, and plotting rebellion." Bo-fu's face turned ashen as he sternly declared, "Preposterous, I have guarded the border for years. And my loyalty to the throne is as clear as the heavens and earth." Before I could refute, Wei Yochi slowly kowtowed, his voice steady and resolute. "Father, your son has a memorial to present." The emperor's gaze darkened as he looked at him. "Speak." Wei Yochi raised his eyes, his sharp gaze like a blade, directly pointing at Bo-fu. "Your son accuses General Bo-fu of the Biaoqi army of forming cliques for personal gain, forging the crown prince's tokens, attempting to frame the heir apparent, supporting Wei Anming's ascension, and plotting treason and usurpation. You're spewing nonsense." Bo-fu flew into a rage, veins bulging at his temples. Wei Yochi sneered and waved his hand, "Bring them up." Several imperial guards escorted a few tightly bound generals forward, precisely the deputy commanders of the Shuozhou army. At the sight of the emperor, they immediately knelt and kowtowed, trembling as they pleaded, "Your Majesty, spare us. It was General Fu who ordered us to disguise ourselves as the imperial guards and frame the crown prince for rebellion. The evidence of Bo Fu's crimes had long been gathered by Wei Yochi. They have now confessed, and I have promised them an outcome that does not implicate their wives and children, knowing Bo Fu's downfall was inevitable. They had no choice but to make this deal with me. Nonsense, Bo Fu roared, his eyes blazing with murderous intent. Your Majesty, this is a frame-up by the Crown Prince. Wei Yochi remained composed, retrieving a stack of secret letters from his sleeve and presenting them with both hands. Father, these are the secret correspondences between Bo Fu and the generals of Shirouzhou. They clearly state their plan to fabricate evidence of the Crown Prince's rebellion during the ancestral rites ceremony, seize the opportunity to depose the heir, and install Wei Anming instead. The emperor took the letters, his expression darkening with each word. Finally, he hurled them at Bo Fu in fury. Bo Fu, what do you have to say for yourself now? Bo Fu's face turned deathly pale as he staggered back a step, his eyes finally revealing fear. He suddenly turned his head, looking towards Wei Anming in the crowd as if seeking help, only to see that Wei Anming had already turned ashen and was quietly retreating, attempting to flee. Heh! I let out a cold laugh and raised my voice. Wei Anming, you think you can escape? I immediately drew my sword and thrust it fiercely into his leg. With a scream, he stumbled and fell to the ground. The Imperial Guards immediately stepped forward and firmly restrained Wei Anming, struggling to lift his head. His eyes filled with venom, he spat out, You're framing me, framing. Wei Yochi's gaze turned icy as he raised his hand and gestured once more, bring forth another witness. A eunuch was brought forward under guard. None other than Wei Anming's trusted personal attendant. He knelt trembling on the ground, his voice quivering as he said, Your Majesty, this humble servant witnessed with my own eyes, Prince Anming conspiring with General Fu. They planned to assassinate the Crown Prince during the ancestral rites, and then forced their way into the palace to seize the throne. Wei Anming's eyes nearly burst with rage as he lunged forward to strangle the eunuch, only to be firmly restrained by the Imperial Guards. Bo Fu's face turned ashen as he finally realized the tide had turned against him. Slowly raising his head, he looked at me, a twisted smile flickering in his eyes. Myra Wei, you've won. The Emperor, furious beyond measure, roared, Guards, take Bo Fu and Wei Anming to the Imperial prison. Let the 3 judicial officers conduct a joint trial. Show them no mercy. Yes, the Imperial Guards responded in unison, stepping forward to apprehend the men. After Bo Fu and Wei Anming were dragged away, the Emperor wearily rubbed his temples and looked at Wei Yochi. Crown Prince, I wronged you. Wei Yochi kowtowed deeply. This son dares not resent his majesty. I only seek to purge the court of traitors and restore clarity to our Wei kingdom. Standing to the side, I watched my younger brother prostrate on the ground, and at last, a long-absent sense of relief surged within me. In this lifetime, we have finally reversed our fate, Bo Fu. Your retribution has only just begun. One by one, Bo Fu's crimes are being uncovered, forming cliques for personal gain, forging military orders, framing the Crown Prince, plotting rebellion. Each charge is a capital offense punishable by the extermination of 9 generations. The Emperor was enraged and with a stroke of his vermilion brush, decreed the severest punishment, Bo Fu, to be torn apart by 5 horses, Wei Anming, immediate execution. Wei Yochi and I knelt before the hall, kowtowing in gratitude. We thank your majesty for discerning the truth and clearing our names. The Emperor waved his hand wearily. Go now, after today, this matter shall be concluded. I exchanged a knowing smile with Wei Yochi. Above the execution ground, dark clouds blotted out the sun. Wei Yochi and I stood atop the city gate tower, looking down at Bo Fu, who was tightly bound at the center of the execution ground. His limbs and neck were tightly secured with thick ropes, and 5 spirited horses stood ready, waiting only for the executioner's command at the stroke of noon. The common folk gathered around the execution ground hurled rotten vegetables and rotten eggs at Bo Fu, cursing incessantly, Traitor, drop dead, what kind of damn general is this? Disgusting. Fu, you treacherous dog, framing the crown prince and princess. This is your retribution." Bo-fu raised his head, his gaze piercing through the crowd, locking directly onto me. I let out a cold laugh and raised my voice. "Bo-fu, did you ever imagine it would come to this?" His face turned deathly pale, his lips cracked, yet he still clung to his last shred of pride. "Myra Wei, do you truly hate me this much?" "What else?" I sneered, looking at him with disdain. "Why?" His voice was hoarse, and a glimmer of moisture actually appeared in his eyes. "Why have you become so cruel? You weren't like this before. I once treated you with genuine sincerity." "Genuine sincerity?" I burst into laughter. "Your so-called sincerity is like dirt to me. Utterly worthless, even. Utterly disgusting." Bo-fu trembled all over, the false tenderness in his eyes shattering instantly, replaced by twisted hatred. "Myra Wei." I raised my hand slightly and enunciated each word deliberately. "The hour has come. Carry out the execution." The order token fell to the ground, and the coachman vigorously cracked his whip. The horses neighed in unison and galloped off wildly. Bo-fu was finally terrified. He struggled and screamed hoarsely, "No, Myra, Princess Changle, spare me. Spare me, please, save me." His pleas were shrill and piercing, but I only felt an overwhelming sense of satisfaction. In my past life, Wei Yochi and I stood on this very city tower, but at that time, Bo-fu stood below, embracing Zara Wei, watching coldly as the people cursed me, driving me to leap to my death to prove my innocence. But today, the same location presents a vastly different scene. Heaven has eyes. This is retribution. Elder sister, don't look. Wei Yochi suddenly covered my eyes from behind, his warm palm blocking my view as his voice whispered softly in my ear, "Don't let it taint your sight." I paused slightly, then chuckled lightly. "All right." The thunderous sound of galloping hooves and Bo-fu's heart-wrenching screams intertwined in my ears. I had never felt such exhilaration before. Before long, Bo-fu's voice gradually weakened, eventually fading into complete silence. At that very moment, the previously overcast sky suddenly cleared, and a dazzling beam of sunlight pierced through the clouds. Shining directly on me, bringing long-lost warmth, I stared blankly at that beam of light, my eyes suddenly reddening. My voice trembled slightly. "Yochi, to be honest, I've been living in fear every day, afraid that all of this is just a dream on our way to the underworld." Wei Yochi suddenly pulled me into his embrace. His chest was warm and solid, his heartbeat clear and audible, making me truly realize this was no dream. "It's not a dream, sister," he said hoarsely. With unwavering determination, "In this lifetime, I will protect you and never let you suffer again." Leaning against his chest, I smiled in relief and said, "All right." When I stepped into Zara Wei's bedchamber, the room was in complete disarray. Shattered porcelain cups littered the floor, and the gauze curtains were torn to shreds. Zara Wei was curled up in a corner, her long hair disheveled, clutching a golden hairpin so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Get out." She suddenly looked up, her eyes bloodshot, her voice hoarse. "Or I'll kill you." I let out a cold laugh and slowly approached. "Zara Wei, the state you're in now is even more pitiful than a stray dog. It's you, it's all your fault," she shrieked, lunging at me with a golden hairpin aimed straight at my heart. I swiftly grabbed her wrist and twisted it hard. "Ah!" she cried out in pain as the hairpin clattered to the ground. "Trash!" I snorted coldly and flung her to the ground. She was shockingly thin, light as a withered leaf, making no sound when she hit the floor. "What are you here for? To laugh at me? I have no time for such idle amusement." I raised my hand in a gesture, and the maid behind me stepped forward with a vermilion lacquered wooden box. "I've come to deliver your wedding gown." The lid of the box was lifted, revealing a grand red wedding dress embroidered with golden phoenixes, exquisitely luxurious. Yet, Zara Wei recoiled as if she had seen a venomous snake. "No. I won't go for the political marriage. I'd rather die than go. You have no choice." I looked down at her coldly. "Bo-fu is dead. Wei Anming has been executed. Do you really think you still have any options left?" Trembling all over, she suddenly crawled over and clutched at the hem of my skirt. "Princess Changle. Sister, I beg you, Those people from the enemy country are beasts, they'll torture me to death. I leaned down, gripping her chin firmly, forcing her to meet my gaze. Zara Wei. Now you're scared. Did you ever think about what I might face when you and Bo Fu schemed to send me off for a political marriage? Her pupils constricted violently, her lips trembling, but not a single word escaped them. I released her, leisurely wiping my fingertips with a handkerchief. It takes at least 3 years to annihilate an enemy nation. During that time, a political marriage is the best way to halt the war, just as you once arranged for me. With that, I turned and walked away. Behind me came her heart-wrenching scream. Myra Wei, you'll get your retribution. I'll haunt you even as a ghost. I stepped over the threshold without looking back, the sunlight stinging my eyes slightly. Retribution. I've already suffered it long ago. The day of the marriage alliance, the sky was ominously overcast. I stood atop the city wall, watching the grand procession gradually fade into the distance. Zara Wei, clad in that magnificent wedding dress, was forcibly shoved into the bridal carriage, her cries audible even from afar. This should have been my moment of greatest triumph, but when the troop became a mere black dot in the distance, my heart felt hollow, devoid of the imagined satisfaction of vengeance. It wasn't until the troop completely vanished beyond the horizon that I suddenly realized I wasn't grieving for Zara Wei. I was grieving for all the women sent away for political marriages throughout the centuries, for those like me, who journeyed alone to foreign lands, struggling to survive in hostile territories, those used as political bargaining chips, trapped for life in gilded cages, those women brushed over with a single stroke in history books, deemed unworthy even of leaving their names behind. I understand their fear, their humiliation, and their blood and tears. What are you thinking about, sister? A familiar voice sounded by my ear. Wei Yochi had appeared at my side without me noticing, gazing at the distant, overcast horizon. I murmured softly, I was just wondering when we'll finally see an era where women no longer have to be sent as brides to stop wars. He fell silent for a moment, then suddenly turned to look at me. Sunlight pierced through the clouds, falling upon his deep-set eyes and brows. Those eyes shone startlingly bright. We will wait for it. He reached out and gently grasped my cold fingers. Elder sister, will you join me in creating such a golden age? The wind lifted the banners atop the city walls, and in the distance, the long, drawn-out sound of a horn echoed. I gripped his hand in return and nodded slowly. All right, this time, what we aim to change is not just our own fate.